Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. In each episode, we invite guests to have honest conversations about their mental health journeys with the goal of destigmatizing mental health within the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Due to the nature of the podcast, we'll be discussing a variety of mental health topics and possibly triggering experiences. While we and the majority of our guests are not trained professionals, we encourage you to practice self-care while listening and seek professional guidance if you or a loved one is in need of support. With that said, let's start the episode.
Hello, my name is Kyle Y. I'm an alcoholic, and I'd like to describe my mental health journey as a slow progression to a hopeful state of mind.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the Changing Tides podcast. I am your host, Matthew Yonemura. Welcome. Hope everyone is off to a good week with this episode coming out. So excited because this is now the very first of the new recordings we have done. So, as I said in a previous intro, we backlogged a lot of interviews just so we knew what our structure looked like. We had interviews and guests lined up. So now we are up to date. This was recorded just a couple of weeks prior to this being released. Super excited to get into this one. The guest today has a very interesting, complex story. This person actually came to us to share his story. So super honored that he decided that Changing Tides would be the platform that he trusted with his story. And honestly, talking to this person was very inspiring for me, just to know the power of that one could have from themselves, from within. So with that much said, we have a longer-ish episode today, but I think it's so great to hear from him. So I think we should just go ahead and get into it. I won't reveal too much about this person's story because he does a much better job at telling his own story than I ever could, or introducing who he is. So I'll let him do all the work there. So before we get to the interview though, please note that this episode discusses alcohol and substance abuse. So please be mindful of this if you choose to continue listening. And with that said, we could go ahead and introduce the guest today, which is Kyle Y. Kyle Y, thank you for joining the podcast. We talked in the past about this. We kind of got to know each other a little bit, and you actually offered to tell your story, which we really appreciate. We love the openness. So I'd like to start by asking you about your description of your mental health journey. And I know you're in recovery. We'll talk about your story, but when you said you're an alcoholic, I'm that's not language I'm familiar with. So if you could describe your journey and why. I know you're sober, but if you could explain why you still call yourself an alcoholic.
Yeah, so just because you're sober, and this is the way it's taught in Alcoholics Anonymous, once you identify as an alcoholic, that's an identity. That's if you're in, I guess, like a state of surrender, in that like you're powerless over alcohol and drugs. Whether or not you're in or out of sobriety, you're still an alcoholic, right?
Mm,
Like that fact doesn't ever change.
okay.
So that's why, even if you'll go to like AA meetings now, you'll see guys with 30 years or whatever, they raise their hand and the first thing they say is, "Hi, my name is, X, and I'm an alcoholic."
Mm,
Um, so yeah.
got it. And then, so before we jump into, the full story, if you could describe why you describe your mental health journey the way you did.
I think I wanted to emphasize that it was a slow journey, and you know, as an addict and alcoholic, like I always wanted the short and quickest way to a solution possible. I took shortcuts all my life, but for me to actually finally find myself in a stable mental state to learn about recovery and do all the internal work, it was slow, and I had to find acceptance with that. And also that it was a slow conversion from being absolutely hopeless, my life completely unmanageable, to eventually, once doing the internal work, finding myself, where I wake up today, and I'm in a hopeful state of mind.
For sure. I love it because I think one thing that we've always talked about on this podcast is the aspect of a journey, and
Yeah.
you've already touched on that a little bit. But I think we could go ahead, and if you're ready, we could just start with the beginning of your story and kind of go to your early life.
Yeah.
Can you explain what it was like for you just growing up?
Yeah. So I grew up in the South Bay in Gardena. And I want to preface this with saying, I will talk about my feelings like I'm honoring them, how I felt in the past. It's in no way a reflection of the relationship I have with like my parents right now. We're doing really well since me being in recovery. But at the time growing up, I'm the son of Peruvian immigrants, and their upright their childhood was different than mine. They were learning their way to navigate America. Um, and I had a stereotypical Asian father, high expectations academically. And I always felt like I had to walk around eggshells around him. I had a very complicated relationship with my father. The communication wasn't there. There were certain things I desired or wanted or compared myself to other people growing up, um, that I started, I think, at an early age, getting very resentful at the way that my father, did things. So that was a little bit of, my relationship with my father. And, I went to schools in San Pedro. So I was like one of like three Asian kids. I got bullied for being the easy target, having slanted eyes. I think that culminated into having like a lot of this like internal self-hatred that I didn't know how to navigate or talk with my father or my mother about. Um, and yeah, that slowly moved into uh just being very lost in that I was doing well academically at a young age, but I was very unhappy with myself and starting to ask myself questions like, well, who am I doing this for? Like, I'm not even happy with who I am. So am I doing this for the recognition of my father? Like, I don't even think he's respecting, the work that I'm putting behind achieving these things that I think he expects of me. So why am I doing any of this? Um, and that was kind of, I guess, like my childhood was like this complicated relationship with my father, also having an older cousin who was basically my big brother. And it was a total night and day difference between how my parents were raising me and how my aunt and uncle were raising my cousin. So whenever I would go to his house was a literal happy place. you know I could stay up late, eat candy all the time, play video games over like all night, didn't have to worry about the next day. So there was a lot of comparison going on with why do we have to live this way versus how I see other people living,
Hmm.
you know so that's a little bit of my childhood, I would say.
Got it. Yeah, it's interesting how, I grew up in Redondo Beach, but I was had a lot of Asian friends growing up, still do. And
Mhm.
excuse me,
Yeah.
like just seeing the differences between each Asian family, it could be very different. And then
Yeah.
especially if like, you're non-Asian friends and then how that's different. But
Hmm.
so it was interesting to hear that. And then I'm curious if you don't mind if we just kind of jump right into it.
Hmm.
What led you to, begin experimenting with substances?
Hmm. So I would say my first exposure was actually like smoking cigarettes with my cousin. So uh in eighth grade summer, I had my first crush, and then that crush broke my heart. And up to then, my relationship with my cousin was very like, just play video games with each other. I just liked hanging out with him, but I remember him extending his hand out to me when I was going through this, at the time, what was a devastating heartbreak. And for him, we bonded over that. And at the same time, around that same time, he started smoking cigarettes. And so he asked me if I wanted to try it. And I very clearly remember the first time that I had smoked a cigarette with him, that I was like, oh, if this feels this good, then what else am I missing out on?
Mm,
That was kind of like I guess, like the seed that was planted in my head, right? Like, of all these stigmatized things, where I was like, huh, like this actually feels really good. Like I get why people smoke
Mm,
now. So um, from that 8th grade going into high school, then it became about like, I tried drinking with my cousin. I actually like stole a Four Loco from 7-Eleven. I remember bringing it to my cousin's house and thinking I was super cool for it. And I remember cracking open that blue raspberry Four Loco, getting halfway through it, and I'm like 14 or 15 at this time. I forget what was like my first my age of first drinking really,
mm.
but I just remember like feeling like for the first time the weight off my shoulders that I'd felt for so long had been lifted.
Oh
And
man.
from there it planted that seed of like, well, why can't I just feel like this as much as I can get my hands on it.
Hmm.
So
It's a couple things. First off,
yeah.
eighth grade, like it might sound silly to you now, but really, like that time in middle school, it's such a formative age. Like
Yeah.
everything does really hit home harder, and it can really affect you
Mhm.
to today or long lasting effects. So
Absolutely.
I like I understand that. I had my heart broken many a times in middle school, and I was like, oh man, like this is never gonna change. Like I'm never gonna like no one's ever gonna love
Yeah.
me. But like that type of stuff, like it really does affect you.
Hmm.
And then secondly, um, jumping straight into a Four Loco is definitely a lot.
Yeah.
I personally never had one, but I've just heard there's so many horror stories with those. So
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting. I do appreciate the fact that you share the specific drink that you got because like
Yeah.
a lot of people know like those aren't like mellow drinks to jump right into. So I think it gives context for the way like something like that could leave
Hmm.
something off your shoulders.
Hmm.
Um, so I just wanted to mention that. But
Hmm.
yeah, so from there, you said you kept wanting to feel this way. So how did your
Hmm.
experience with drugs or alcohol escalate from there?
Yeah. So I think it's important to note that at this point I was like, F finding validation from my father. I just want to be cool like my
Mm,
cousin. I want to be exactly like him. And so I really emulated a lot of what he was doing. He was starting to go to parties, where essentially I got introduced to things like, smoking weed, uh, taking ecstasy, a lot more drinking. And so throughout high school, I think like my go-tos really were a lot of weed smoking, ecstasy, and drinking. Like I did a lot of those. Um, and back then it was still fun with problems. Didn't really have many responsibilities. Just show up to class, but I wasn't really present. Um, and yeah, I mean, for high school, that's what the bulk of it was. Was more just like party, drugs, and drinking and social. You know.
mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Throughout this time in your life, like if you could think back to your mindset then, did you sense like, did you have regret or did you just kind of see this as like, this is kind of just who I am now and I'm happy with that?
Yes, I think such a big part of my identity then was formed around this notion that I was such a drug expert, and like I'm like I was the weirdo that was like on Arrowhead where you can like look up usage reports and like studying the different, how ecstasy's MDMA, like I got really weird with it,
Mm,
essentially. And yeah, at that point I was, you know, I think always in the back of my mind there was like, oh my God, like I think I'm going down a very dark path, but I am not experiencing the kind of consequences and horror stories that I hear about from people
mm,
who go down this path yet. So I might be different, and I would kind of want to separate myself in this notion that I'm going to figure it out. But as far as, being sober back then, there were definitely times where I attempted it, but it was very, lackluster, and I would just soon again be back on
mm.
doing whatever I was doing. So I think a little bit of both
Okay,
to answer your
gotcha,
question.
for
Yeah.
sure. So, prior to today, we did speak, and you shared how this was this time that you're describing in high school is an
Mhm.
especially difficult time.
Yeah.
Do you feel comfortable sharing any of that for the podcast?
Yeah. Definitely. So should I just go into like Uh,
Yeah. Whatever
okay.
you're comfortable with sharing.
Yeah, so it wasn't so much high school as much as it was the transition of high school into college. So, I had my ex at the time who I'd been with for about like 4 or 5 years going into college. Um, and so, I was very codependent in this relationship, and we both had our things that I think were unresolved that, we try to look for in each other. Um, and so going into college, by this time I was so undisciplined. I had not studied for anything in so long. I thought I could, you know, I got into Cal State Long Beach. I thought I could just again wing it the same way I'd been winging high school. And that wasn't the case. I remember going to class like the first couple days and just being like, I don't know if I even want to do school anymore. But at this point, I'm living in the dorms. The story I'm painting to my parents is I'm doing just fine. I'm figuring things out. Uh, but that was very short lived in that, like my days after like the first week of actually showing up to classes where I would just wake up, I would smoke weed or drink, and I would just be at my dorm all day waiting for my ex to get out of her class so I could just hang out with her. All my friends from high school had went on to different UCs and were taking care of their own lives. And I really robbed myself of stepping outside of my comfort zone and doing normal things that I assume people do, which is like joining clubs or
Mm.
even frats or sororities or whatever to build a new connection with people going transitioning into college. I did not do any of that. I was just at my dorm all day, getting high and drunk and waiting for my ex to get out of class, so we could go out to eat. And, it was like Groundhog's Day like that. Um, so moving on from that, um, I did stay really close with my cousins at that time. And every single weekend we would do something like a cousins night where we would like, play League of Legends or watch movies together. And we did this throughout the entire duration of like that first year into college.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Essentially one of those cousins night into that me being in college, um without going too much into the details, my older cousin that I mentioned, that I was really close to, uh ended up passing away in front of me and all my cousins, which at that point, um you know, uh, was a very traumatic experience for me and everyone in there that witnessed that. And that was the point where I feel like my identity, any semblance of any identity that I did have at that point, which is surrounded around drugs and the validation of my cousin, was just like shattered. Like it felt like my identity had just fragmented because the days following that and the months and years, like I didn't know who I was anymore. um so that happened. And then you know God bless my ex for staying with me for the subsequent year despite our uh relationship not being great at that point already. There reached a point even in that relationship, like I said, we've been together for 5 years, where we were both just like, okay, like we're both obviously not happy, and I think it's best we go our separate ways. And it was a clean break, and to this day I wish nothing but the best for her. Um but yeah, it was at that point too where I was like, okay, well, um what am I doing on this earth anymore? Like asking myself those questions. And now I didn't have the quote unquote burden of having to think about my drinking and how it affects someone else I care for deeply. So now I can really go off the deep end. So those are kind of some of the things I think I experienced that really set me down this rabbit hole, you
Mm.
know.
So, um, okay, before we continue, are you good? Do you need a break or anything? Or you good to
No,
power
no,
through? Okay, for
I'm
sure. I
good.
just want
Yeah,
to make
thank
sure I
you.
respect your space.
Absolutely, I appreciate that.
Of course.
Mhm.
Um, so from here, you said you kind of went down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Do you mind explaining a little bit how specifically things continue to to spiral in a sense?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So at this time, in between all what I just mentioned was like flunking out of Cal State Long Beach, trying my attempts at community colleges, failing out of those, all those things happening, and then reaching a point where I was literally like, okay, I can't even do school now.
Mm,
Like, let me see if I can just hold a job for a year and then we'll reassess like what I want to do with my
right.
life. Let's see if I can just at least manage that. Um, Fortunately, I have a very loving family, and my uncle, I extended his hand out to me and offered me a job. And I said like, okay, I'm going to commit to this for a year, and we'll try school after that. So by this time I had so where I got a lot of my things was like the darknet market. I learned how to navigate that. So that was way too much
Mm,
accessibility and power for I think anyone to have. But anyways, with that came me once again getting into a lot of benzos, a lot of amphetamines, and going into work with my uncle. Uh, 2 months into that, I was using benzos, amphetamines, I was smoking weed and drinking at night. And then 2 months into working with my uncle, 2 or 3 months, I got T-boned on my way to work. Um, to which, I had to go to the hospital for them to do a checkup on me. And I remember like the nurse asking me if I had ever had morphine. And I had opiates before, but of course I told her like, no, I've never had any of that. Does it make you sleepy? I knew damn
mm,
well what it did.
right.
Um, and once they had put morphine in me was when I asked myself the question, like, oh my God. The same way when I first drank that sip from the Four Loco was like,
Mm,
okay, this is the new line I'm setting for myself. Like, why haven't I been doing opiates?
mm,
Um, and so from there, I found my own way to gain access to opiates. And after that was like I was just like addicted to opiates, amphetamines, benzos, drinking at night. Like I was just doing anything to literally not really be conscious even when I was awake.
mm.
Um and that's really kind of like what the end of my ran looked like was like a trash can of all these drugs.
Mm.
Mhm.
So, at this point, we haven't even really mentioned, like, at what point in all this do your parents find out, or what caused you to tell them? Like, have they known this whole time, or have you like been able to keep it a secret this whole time?
Yeah, so my dad caught me a couple times with the weed smoke, and I think they knew that throughout this time I was having like a really big drinking problem.
Mm,
But as far as the benzo and amphetamine and usage, I really think they had no idea I was like dabbling with that stuff throughout this entire time. Um, the way in which it came out was so, I worked for a year. I was able to keep that commitment while I was high on all these things.
mm,
Um, got back into school, and uh, it was like the last 3 months of my using all these things, like I was slowly starting to like kind of hear stuff that wasn't there. I was becoming very paranoid. Um, and one day in particular, uh, I was supposed to, help volunteer for like this Japanese food festival that my sister had told me about. And I was like hitting this wax pen all day too. And I think it was just a culmination of just everything at that point where, I still to this day don't know if it was like weed, if it was just me and my state where I was at, how my body had been just through the ringer with all these things, and it just finally hit me. But it was like 6 a.m. in the morning, and I'm vividly hearing what I assume to be like the voices of other people on the block, to
mm.
which I've now developed a telekinetic connection with, and know that I'm intruding in their thoughts, and so they're becoming very hostile to me, and they're starting to threaten my life for
Wow.
invading their privacy. So I am literally at this point hearing to their instruction to like jump into, you know, back in the backyards of people around my block,
Wow.
um, thinking that, you know, these voices are out to get me. And I do this about like 3 separate times, because when I do get to like say the backyard of someone's block, I'm like with my hands behind my back, behind my head. You know, they're telling me like, okay, we just wanted to see that you would do that, but now we're just going to live like this for the rest of our life, and screw you for now, you know, doing this telekinetic thing. I'd walk back to my house, and then I would like curse them out in my head. Then they would question what I just said, and they would quote unquote make me do it again. And so I did that 3 separate times.
Wow.
And till my mom walked out of her room, and she was like, Kyle, what is going on? It's 6 a.m. in the morning. Like we heard the door close like 3 times. And it was at this point where I am like torn, because I know I've crossed this line of insanity, and whatever I say is not going to make sense to people, but I can't deny that for me it's very real. It was
Mm,
like this purgatory of like, I'm insane, but am I really insane? Like, what if the
mm,
things I'm hearing are true and they're going to kill my family? Um, Essentially, I ended up breaking down, and I tell my mom like, this is what I'm hearing right now. Um, she brings out my father. I tell him the same thing, and I think at this point they know like, something's really off with our son. They take me to, I think it was Del Amo Urgent Care or Torrance Memorial, and you know, at that point I have the fear that they're going to 5150 me and put me in psychiatric hold for 2 weeks. And you know, withdrawal from benzos and alcohol is particularly can be lethal. So that's where I was like, okay, I just need to let you all know it's not just weed smoking, it's not just drinking. I've been on this amount of opiates, I've been on this amount of amphetamines, and I've been on this amount of benzos for, you know, the past year. um and so that's kind of how it all came out,
mm.
you know.
So once you're in the urgent care and you tell all this to your parents, first
Yeah.
off, how do your parents react? And second off, what were the next steps? Because I mean, you're here today, you're sober today, so
Yeah.
how did it go from there?
How did it go from there? So, you know, from there, I my dad had actually promised me on the way to driving to the urgent care, when I told him like, if you 5150 me, um, you know, like I think I will just like never come back.
Hmm.
And he promised me that he wouldn't put 5150 me, which looking back, I don't know that I would have done the same in his position. Like I was
Hmm.
hearing things, right? But the way that my mom had told me that night, you know, when we came back to the house, was that the social worker was obviously saying like, we gotta put him on hold or something. And my dad said, I gave him my word. If he starts to present a danger to myself or to my wife or to himself, like we will 5150 him the minute that that happens. Um, but I gave him my word. And so me and my wife are going to take the next couple of days or weeks off of work, and we're just going to have him at our bedside and go cold turkey off of all these things. And we'll monitor it. Um, and so, yeah, that's what they did. I didn't even know that's what happened. And that my dad kept his promise until my mom told me later that night. And as humble as my dad is, like he walks in while my mom is telling me that, and my dad tells her he didn't like that, she didn't need to tell me that.
Hmm.
um I think that was like the first like heartfelt, like, oh my god, like my dad's a good guy.
Hmm.
um but anyways, from there, you know, we find a psychiatrist, uh and from there that psychiatrist directs us to a IOP, an intensive outpatient known as Clear, where I would, you know, after I with after I go cold turkey, I'm going to this IOP where we do group counseling. They set me up with a therapist, and I work with my psychiatrist, and they, you know, direct me to AA meetings. Um, but you know, I get sober for 30 days over there. Um, And at this point, they're telling me that I need to commit to a lifetime of sobriety. And by this time, my ego's kind of regenerated where I'm like, well, you guys are telling me I can't smoke weed or drink ever, like ever in my life, ever again.
Mm,
Uh, and I obviously become resentful towards that and I relapse.
mm,
To which then they, recommend to my mom and dad, like, we should put him in a sober living because he can't be trusted at your guy's house anymore. And I reluctantly agree to go, but I'm not having it. And I sneak in Xanax there. I'm getting high for like 3 to 4 nights there. To which point, the manager of that house is like, this guy sucks. He obviously
mm,
doesn't respect what we're doing here. And so now we're going to send him to a place called New Life, which is one of, I think, the more strict programs in all of US in terms of recovery. But once I got to that place, I recognized that I was able to ask myself, like, this is what my life has come to. Like,
mm.
I'm just like now in a treatment, rabbit hole. Like, and it's because I am unwilling to accept that I can't drink or use for the rest of my life. So I think that was like where the start of my real surrender, to that fact started.
Wow. So, so just for people to have reference, so IOP, the
Yes.
intensive outpatient, that's essentially kind of like a rehab type of program,
Hmm.
correct? Okay. And
Yeah,
then so how long did that last?
that lasted for about 30 days.
30 days. And
Hmm.
that included being in like the sober living facility where you were bringing in like your own drugs, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So that was like 30 days LP, 4 days at the South Bay Sober Living.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that they recommended you go to New Life, which you did. And people have had a range of experiences with programs like these because, as you said, like you personally, your ego was in the way when it came to just committing to being sober. And, it's just people have a range of experiences. But can you explain like what it is, like what New Life exactly is, and also how it worked out, how it ended up working out for you personally?
Yeah. So what New Life is it's like a behavior modification program in that, you're there with 30 other, at least like 30 other guys also in early recovery who, need structure in their lives. So in contrast to where I just got kicked out of, where you get your car after like a couple weeks, you have your phone the entire time, you can surf the internet, you can reach out to your friends outside of the sober living, blah blah blah. You just got to make sure you go to meetings. Here in New Life, you wake up at 7:30, and from there you're already making sure all of your belongings are tight, like nice and tidy, or else you essentially get a write up for it where you have to like write standards for it later.
Mm,
And then at 8 in the morning, you're um, sharing from the AA book and you're sharing your experience, so it's called morning med. From there, you guys are doing like chores, um, for the basically the entire duration of the day. You're always kind of doing some kind of responsibility, whether it's cleaning or holding down the house at some capacity, or getting into it with guys around the house in terms of like being vulnerable, um, and opening up to these guys. And then at around dinner time every single day, you're getting into situations that happen throughout the day where dishonesty or certain character defects have come up. And for example, you'll be like, hi, I want to bring up Kyle because I realized that he was just kind of like sitting out there, sitting on the bench alone. And like, we've already told them that he shouldn't isolate. So I think we should just talk to him about like, like this is the same kind of behavior that he was, this is the same way that he separated himself prior to coming into New Life. And like, we
mm,
just want to show him that like, he can come to us and then they'll talk to me and address me on that. So that's what I mean by behavior modification, right? It's like
mm-hmm.
no privacy whatsoever. accountability from 0 to 100.
Right.
And meanwhile you're learning to grow bonds with these guys that you're going through the house with. Yeah.
So, like, clearly that's a very intense program. And
Very.
I think, you need to give yourself credit because, I mean, I'm going to ask you a little bit about how,
Mhm.
what was next, like how the program went for you. But I mean,
Yeah.
there's has to be like a part of you that has to also open up to it. So I think it's credit to you for being able to open up to the program in itself because, you could come in with the attitudes like, I don't need this. I'm gonna reject it. This isn't gonna
Yeah.
work for me anyways.
Yeah.
But can you talk about what your stay at how did your stay at New Life end?
Uh-huh. Okay, so for me, like I mentioned, guys will get addressed on a variety of things, whether it's like they're like the class clown, and that's always been the thing that they've like the way in which they've escaped from dealing with situations, or they'll be the person who has never been tidy in their life and how that
Mm,
bleeds into their other aspects of their life, right? And they just can't seem to get it even when they know that their eyes are on them. For me personally, my uh I had a lack of, what I realized was self-compassion. I had a lack of being able to be vulnerable to others, thinking that I had to, always figure out things for myself. Um, for example, one of the programs that they put me on personally, you'll go through different programs within the house, and for me, they'll give me a verbal like, "Hi, my name is Kyle. No one can hear what is never said. Help me remember that closed mouths don't get fed."
hmm.
And so, if I want to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and I'm asking the manager, I have to say that verbal every single time I ask for anything,
Wow.
permission for anything. Another one was, "Hi, my name is Kyle. Being vulnerable makes me uncomfortable. Let me tell you one way I'm owning my truth today." And so
Hmm.
then I'd have to answer that with one way I'm owning my truth today.
Wow.
And so that was my issue, was asking for help.
Hmm.
The biggest thing for me. So outside of that, I didn't get addressed too much outside of like, when guys could tell I was like isolating, or not wanting to get into certain things. um, but essentially the way that my stay ended was, after 30 days, first they get you on, or after 90 days, first they get you on a 90-day commitment, and after that they're like, okay, this is really like 14 and a half months, are you down for that? um, and once my 90 days came, I was like, as much as I didn't want to be there, like, you were able to like put your shoes in the people who get sent there, like, yeah,
Right.
everyone that goes through there does not want to go through it
Right.
initially. You're
Right.
saying yes to, okay, no more internet, no contact with your friends prior to going here. It's just back to you and having to hear about yourself and being in this military style place for an
Right.
extended period of time. So, you know, I agreed after 90 days. And, I learned a lot about myself. I went through the 12 steps of AA as well. And after my 14 and a half months there, I also got offered to night manage their rent free for 6 months.
Hmm.
So that's what I did right after I graduated. And yeah, I was able to do that.
I mean, to graduate from New Life is a feat.
Yeah.
I mean, from any of those types of programs, if you're
Yeah.
able to commit to it, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, what helped you decide like I need to commit to these 14 and a half months? Because it would be very easy for almost anyone to say like, no, like I got it. Don't need
Yeah.
like it's not for me. How
Yeah.
like what told you like I need to do this?
I think like that, just like the humility that I felt when I got kicked out of that first sober
Mm,
living, and that question I asked myself, and the 90 days after that in New Life, where you come into contact with all these graduates who still stop by the house, who are very accomplished. And then you see also the guys who are going back into New Life after they've been sober for 5 years, but then they went out and everything came
mm,
crashing down. So they're going through the program with you again. And, like I went through like a couple of guys that I went through the program with. have passed away because they they graduated and everything, but then they wanted to live a certain life outside of it that wasn't healthy and found themselves in the same predicament. And some of them have passed away as a result of that. These were guys that I was like sleeping in bunk beds with for like, like 14 and a half months, and that I developed relationships with. I think that for me was enough proof that I could see anecdotally in just that this is exact as like I cannot emphasize this enough. As much as I did not want to be there, was either this worked for me or I didn't know what else I could do because I couldn't trust myself anymore. I was far past that point of, well, maybe next time will be different, you know.
Right.
So I think it was just the humility and absorbing that,
I think that's a lot though. Like I think again, I
Yeah.
think that takes like I hope you've given yourself credit before because it's like you
Mhm.
for you to open yourself up to say like, "Oh, I know I can't trust myself to be responsible here."
Yeah.
That's a lot because I mean like it yeah, I just think that's a lot of power to you.
Yeah.
You graduated from the program, you did the extra 14 and a half months.
Mhm.
Um, you did then you were able to get the night manager position for 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
So after that, what was next for you?
So for me, after that was moving out with a couple of other grads that I went through the program with. And then from there, I was still working as a back server at North Italia at a restaurant. Um, and at this time, I've been looking for like a second part time, really something simple. Like I was honestly looking for like a Uniqlo part time or something
Mm.
too, because I just wanted extra money. Um, and I still wanted to enjoy that, like a little bit after me graduating and leaving the house of just like experiencing life sober, moved out as a graduate. That's kind of like how it usually goes for most graduates before rushing into, oh, I want to do school and I need to get my life back on track, blah, blah, blah. So first it was that, to which, I got really, I was really fortunate in that, moving into this year was now like going into the pandemic. The restaurants were closing. Um, and I had just scored this job as a job coach for a nonprofit, thanks to my friend, who had referred me. And I was doing that from like February to, I want to say, like April. And within those 2 months, they liked my work ethic and they asked if I wanted to be case manager for their Pasadena section. So going into quarantine, that was what, I was able to quit the restaurant job completely with that promotion. And so, I did that. And when fall 2020 came around, I came back to school. And yeah, that's kind of what it looked like right after my graduation.
Wow. So were you still working as the case manager while you went back to school in fall?
Yes.
Wow.
I
Okay.
worked as the case manager there up until like now, I want to say like a month ago.
Mm. Wow.
Mhm.
Um, so you did mention quarantine.
Yeah.
During the quarantine, a lot of people had a challenge of staying away from alcohol or other
Mhm.
substances. Like I know sales for like I know like a lot of liquor stores sales like
Yeah.
skyrocketed when quarantine started.
Mhm.
Um, if you don't mind me asking, was it difficult for you when we were all advised to shelter in place and a lot of people felt like all I could do is drink today? How
Mhm.
did you hold up during quarantine?
Yeah. So for me personally, it honestly wasn't too difficult. I mean, at that point, I was living with my other sober friends, right? And like I told you, we just went through this process of holding each other accountable at all times. So
Mm,
they know when I'm not going to meetings. They know when I'm like just being in my room all day and being weird. Like we were going to Zoom meet, like AA was still doing Zoom meetings. You could still find a Zoom meeting, whatever. Um, I could still work with my sponsees over the phone, be of service that way. And most of all, too, like I was very fortunate. Like I said, I got that opportunity to work from home as a case manager. So I was productive that way most days. My mind could just be focused on that. Um, and when the gym started closing up, like for me, lifting is a big part of my life right now. like 5 days a week at least. So when gyms closed down, I went like full 180, and I was like, okay, like I've always wanted to get back into running. So I
Mm,
started running a lot. I was like running 5 days a week. Um, and I also have a big family down here. So we were doing like Among Us over Zoom and like staying close that way. And I really didn't feel disconnected from all the things that were keeping that I was transitioning back into, right? Um, one of the ways I keep it simple with me and how I view recovery and all those things was very was ingrained in me very early on when someone in a meeting said like the opposite of addiction is connection.
mm,
So I'm constantly always asking myself like, do I feel disconnected from everything and everyone right now? Like, what am I not doing to address this thing? What am I doing to address these things? And for me, it always comes back down to, am I being transparent? Am I being of service? Does my family and my friends know where I'm truly at with things? Am I opening up about where I am struggling emotionally? Um, so it's not to say that I don't have my days where I'm particularly like down on myself, but uh, there's a lot of more acceptance with that, and I know I have people that I can reach out to when I am feeling that. You know?
I have a couple of questions that sparked from that. So I'll
Yeah,
just ask the first one.
yeah.
It sounds like you've developed a really strong support system.
Mhm.
So I'd like to ask you, like how important has the support system been since getting sober, and how has it evolved since getting sober? And then
Yeah.
also, you're clearly being of service to people, and it's a priority for you to be of service. So
Mhm.
how does having a support system play into your life, and then what makes you want to pay it forward and help others?
Um, so support system. I've always been like, I remember even in my using, like I always thought I was like a martyr or something. And I was always like, oh, I'm ride or die for my friends, like I'm
Mm,
ride or die. Uh, but I really I fell short a lot in the past.
mm,
Regardless, when I went into new life, it was like it was literally just back to me finding myself and me learning to rebuild that relationship with my mom, dad,
mm,
and sister, and just them, not my aunts and uncles. Too, like I said, I have a huge family, and I
mm,
kind of just disappeared from their lives because I just got kicked out of sober living into this new one, right? Um, and I couldn't tell my friends where I just gone to. I just also vanished out of their lives. So it really it made me focus back on such a small plan, like a small scope of what I needed to focus on,
mm,
that from there I was able to change my foundation, the way that I looked at things. And I think that's how it, as I reconnected, all those things that I relearned or changed about the way I was living and showing up to my commitments, following through, um, has now bled into me reconnecting and being that person that I wish I was before, in the relationships with all those people. So I credit my recovery completely to the fact that my parents, you know, were completely willing to offer me life, uh, this life jacket of, you're either gonna go to new life now and commit to it, or like you are gonna have to figure it out, and we're gonna not. This is the only way we'll help you now. You know, um, and had it not been for that, for them doing that, I would not have. I would not. I firmly believe I would not be where I'm at today.
mm.
You know, so for me, it supports everything. Yeah.
And then, I'm all like you also said, like you're living with other graduates from the New Life program. And are
Yeah.
you still living with them?
Yeah, yeah. So I live one with one that's actually the current manager
Oh,
there,
wow.
and also one that was working at the Clear IOP too. So like a lot of what you'll see is a lot of the graduates tend to like either immediately work in recovery or find their way back to it after doing school or what have you. But yeah, the two roommates that I'm currently living with, they actually work with New Life.
Wow.
So
I mean, it's amazing. Like you've expanded your support. Not so. I'm guessing you've also
mhm.
expanded then to your larger family. Like your foundation was so solid that you were able to kind of grow the support system from there.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. So it was
Wow.
like the family, the guys that I developed relationships with throughout the house. That became a whole other set of people that I could go to the manager who was managing the house at the time, the directors. It's like a family over there, right?
Wow.
So it's like at any point I could call and hit up any one of those guys and know that they understand my struggle. So
Hmm. And
yeah,
I really want to paint the picture of the way that
yeah,
you pay it forward because talking to you, like, you
yeah.
clearly are a very empathetic person and you want to care for
Mm-hmm.
other people. So I'm curious about how and what ways you pay it forward and who you pay the support forward to, and
Mm-hmm.
like what drives you to do that, to be of service for others.
Yeah. For me, at the end of the day, this makes me feel good about myself, right? It's kind of like selfish and self-serving in my own way. It's like these acts of service helps me hit the bed at night knowing like I added something to life rather than
Mm,
take away from it, you know. And the way that you learn it through AA and New Life is, in a spiritual sense, I guess you could say. It's like the disease of alcoholism is one based and rooted in selfish self-centeredness, and that's going to always be a part of me. um so how do I use that, knowing that fact about myself, right? So being a service helps me, it helps me
mm,
help you, and it also helps me at the end of the day. How do I give it back? I take other dudes through the 12 steps as freely as my sponsor who did so for me. um where none of these guys need to do any of that, but we do it because someone did it so freely for me, taking time out of their day to have coffee with me for an hour to
mm,
talk about how I was mad that someone addressed how I didn't wipe the baseboards,
mm.
when I was doing
Right.
my chore or
Right.
something, and to understand where I've come from, right? And credit all that success to the fact that people were willing to take their time out of their day to help me. That's why, I'll speak at psych wards about my story. That's why I'll share at meetings. That's why when I'm asked to do something in AA, even randomly, like like I'll offer my help. Or for New Life in particular, a lot of the people in house ask for rides for grads, either to work or to meetings or to events, and to be of service that way too. And it's just like something that's so ingrained in me now, like so
For
yeah.
sure.
Mhm.
That's amazing. And you know, this wasn't an easy journey for you. Like, it's
Absolutely.
been a long one, and
Mhm.
if you reflect on it to get to where you are now,
Mhm.
are I'm sure you could look at it as there might have been an easier path taken, but are there any aspects of this journey that you could look back and be thankful for?
Any aspects of the journey? I think just any and every instance where I began to see the value in humility, vulnerability, you know, how much really it was a matter of the support that I had and just me being willing to see things for what they were, you know. Um, because that's like I told you, my whole thing was I couldn't ask for help. I felt like I had to maintain this image of like, I got it, I know what I'm doing. And as a result, feel so lonely thinking that way. Um, so it was in knowing that I never really needed to be alone. It was like me needing to step out of my own way was like the biggest realization. Going into New Life, I always pointed the finger at whatever authority figure
Mm,
or whatever piece of life wasn't going the way I wanted, and that's why my life was the way it was. New Life taught me that I needed to take radical acceptance and radical ownership of who I was and what I was dealing with. um, and that person, that thing being, I was dealing with me,
hmm.
you know. So all in all, that the whole experience and everything I encountered was going back to that lesson, right? I was like, I need to step out of my own way, and I need to start relying on others.
Hmm.
So
And I think, I mean, even when you were talking about, um, you know, the breakup that you had, you said
yeah.
it yourself. that like even in that sense, you're like, oh, I was codependent. I had
Yeah.
my issues. You like, like it's easy, like in breakups, to be like, oh, it was their fault. But the
Yeah.
fact that you took ownership of that, like in all aspects, like
Yeah.
we could see that you're a person that can take responsibility and accept,
Mhm.
your own faults.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to get to where you are now, even when you said like prior to prior to even trying substances, you were a
Yeah.
person that, you know like, who am I doing this for, what is this for? But now it's very clear, like, you know what it's for. It's You're trying to help others, but you're also doing this for yourself. And I just
Exactly.
think, like no matter what the journey that you took before that, like you've still become such a well-rounded person. It's just amazing to see. um
Mhm.
and
Thank you.
you are here talking to us, three
Yeah.
years and 6 months sober,
Mhm.
which is amazing. And I'm curious, what is next for you from here?
Yeah, so for me currently, I mean, some of the things on my plate right now, like I'm taking 3 summer classes currently at Elko. I'm just trying to transfer out and finish a bachelor's in psychology, while also doing online schooling to get a KDAC certification. It's the certification you need to be an official substance abuse counselor. Um, so that's kind of like my 3 to 5 next 3 to 5 years is just like get to where I want to be academically. I've done well with budgeting myself so that I don't have to move back to my parents too. Not to say that there's anything wrong with that too, because I mean I could go on a whole political tangent, but
It's just a goal
it's
for you to
just
have, though.
it's just a goal for me to have because I honestly think too that uh I mean just to see how far my relationship has come ever since my parents have had to not worry about me and how we interact now, and it's like I don't want to like risk I don't even want to risk going back there,
I hear you.
even if it could work.
Right.
I don't want to risk going back there.
Right.
So for me right now, it's literally just fully charge school and get to where I want to be academically. And then when I finish my KDAC certification in 2 months or so, revisit if I could do a part-time counseling. But for now, it's just the school stuff.
Mm.
Mhm.
um I do have some quick fire, just fun to get to know you
Yeah,
questions. But before that,
yeah.
I'm curious if there's anything you'd like to say before we jump into that.
No, I just want to thank you for the opportunity for letting me speak and share my story. That means the world to me, and hopefully somebody can get something out of this, and that's what my hope would be.
Of course. And I think it's amazing that you're so open to share this story, because, not only is this, like, as far as being within the AAPI community, there's
Mhm.
this stigma or this idea of the model minority myth. And
Yeah,
we're not all perfect. We're not all great at academics. We don't all go to
mhm.
become nurses and doctors and lawyers. Like, we all
Yeah,
have these different routes. And I just think it rounds out us as a people to hear, like, we go through struggles, but we, just like anyone else, we're gonna be, some of us could climb up out of it. And you're a prime
yeah,
example of that. And you're gonna go on. I mean, to kind of be like on the educational side, but it's not the
yeah.
traditional route as most Asian Americans. Um,
Exactly.
but I say all this to say, like, I appreciate the openness, because no matter what culture you come from,
Mm,
you're telling a very personal, honest story, and it's also
yeah.
amazing to hear where you are now. So
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you coming on here. But this is actually mostly usually the more stressful part for people, interestingly.
Is it
But it's nothing crazy. It's just fun. So
okay?
if we jump into the quick fire, if you could
Okay.
invite 5 people to dinner, dead or alive, who would they be?
Uh, I would say 5 people. Dude, I love Tupac, Kendrick, and Malcolm X.
Okay.
Are 3 of them. The fourth one would probably be, hmm, man. Do I want to just keep doing more rappers too? I'd probably put J. Cole there too. I
Okay.
love J. Cole.
Okay.
Um, and then the fifth one, uh, I want to meet Robert Kennedy too because
Okay.
I started learning a lot about Robert Kennedy and I really
Okay.
like it.
I think I like that. It'll be a more dynamic dinner with that Robert Kennedy in there. It's just like it's a
Yes,
very
yes, yeah.
um I didn't have this on the list, but I didn't know you were into lifting. I'm into lifting as well. But what's your
Oh
favorite
yeah.
lift day? Like, what's your favorite muscle group to lift?
For me, I'm like I love chest day,
Okay.
bench press all the way.
I hear you. I'm hitting that right after this, so
Hey,
I'm
that's
excited. I'm
right.
excited.
That's what's up.
Because same here. I think like I go through my phases, but I'm definitely in a chest, tricep,
Hmm.
shoulder push
Yeah,
day.
shoulder too.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's all about the push, man.
1,000,000%.
Yeah.
What is a hidden talent that you have?
Hidden talent that I have. Um, mm, I can clutch a Warzone game here and there.
That's definitely a talent.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I might be getting inquiries after this, like, hey, what's Kyle's gamer tag so that I could add him real
What's his
quick.
handle?
Yeah, what's
Let
his
me get
handle?
that.
What is your favorite movie?
Oh, my favorite movie. Oh, damn.
If you don't know your all-time favorite, you could just list one that you think might be like one of your favorites at the moment.
Yeah. This might sound super hacky, but every time it pops up on Netflix, I will rewatch it. I'm gonna sound super hacky for it. I love The Dark Knight so much. I love The
Kyle,
Dark Knight so
Kyle,
much.
that's not hacky at all. I went to film school. I
Yeah.
was like a film student, and that's my
Yeah.
all-time favorite movie. Don't you
Really?
worry. Yeah, don't
Uh,
worry.
it's
Big
just
Christopher
so
Nolan
good.
guy.
Yeah,
Oh,
Christopher Nolan all the way, man.
it's so good. No, I
It's
trust me, not hacky at all. I thought you
yeah.
were gonna go and say like, I don't know, like Hubie's Halloween, like one of those Adam Sandler Netflix movies, but no, don't
Yeah.
worry.
Jack and Jill.
Yeah. Don't worry, not hacky.
Oh yeah, or any Quentin Tarantino too.
Okay. Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Mm.
Um, a skill that you don't have but wish you had.
Mm, I wish I could play the piano.
Mm, that'd be a
Yeah,
good one.
yeah.
If you could give advice to yourself 5 years ago, what would it be?
Uh, if you keep doing drugs, you will literally reach a point where you're hearing voices in your head. So stop it. Just very
That
straight to the point.
that's pretty valid. That's
You
pretty
know?
valid. I'll,
Yeah,
it would be interesting to know if that younger version of yourself would have listened. But hey, he still would have hit new life. Still would have had this
exactly.
turnaround. So it worked out for
Exactly.
you.
Yeah.
Um, with California starting to reopen,
Mhm.
cautiously reopening, what are you most excited about?
Mm, I mean, I love eating out. So, and I started being exclusive with someone. So definitely a
Hmm,
lot of like eating out and just continuing to get to know each other that way.
for
So,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely easier to be in a relationship when you're not being stuck in your
Hunker
home.
down.
So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely easier.
Yeah.
If you could live anywhere else in the world, where would you go?
Mm, either Okinawa or Peru.
Wow. Okay, those
Yeah.
are fun.
Yeah.
Those are fun.
Mhm.
And then to round this out,
Yeah.
what would the title of your autobiography be?
Mm, the life and title.
Tough one.
How I came back from insanity.
Wow, that's definitely a page turner. That
Yeah.
would draw
Yeah.
someone in
Exactly. It's a
for
great
sure.
hug too, because
It
at
is
some point I've been insane, but then I also came back from it like a
for
real
sure.
hero's journey.
I love it. Definitely. Well, Kyle, thanks so much for joining the podcast. Thanks so much for
Mm,
your honesty and your story.
absolutely.
Um, I can't thank you enough, and also just
Thank
have
you.
a good one.
You too.
Cool.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you again to Kyle Y for sharing about his alcohol and substance abuse and a very personal story that I was honored for him to tell me about and to share with the podcast. Again, as I said in the intro, I think Kyle was super inspiring, and we talked off the recording, and Kyle's a super cool guy. So I was really cool to get to know him and share his story with everyone. But with that said, if you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe to our show for our episodes releasing on every other Tuesday. Give us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. If you would like to support our podcast and help us grow, you can do so with a donation to the link at the bottom of the episode description. To hear more about Changing Tides, follow us on Instagram at LTSC_Changing Tides, or check out our website, thechangingtides.org. Let's continue to change the tides on mental health.
We got